In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, near Norway and Iceland, lies a country of 18 islands that many people call the edge of the world. This place is not only geographically isolated from the rest of the world, but it is also socially boycotted by many countries. In the eyes of many, it remains surrounded by controversy. Countless travelers from around the world have said they would never want to visit it. Some consider it one of the most beautiful places on earth, while others see it as a land of dark traditions and a bloody history. But why? This is the Faroe Islands. It is a place whose history has been written by the sea, storms, and blood. A place where Viking warriors settled more than 1,000 years ago. Even today, some traditions here divide the world into two sides. One of them is the hunting of whales, not fish. It is a ritual in which the sea turns red with blood. To its supporters, it is a tradition of survival. To its critics, it is a practice that has no place in the modern world. But the truth is, if you want to understand the Faroe Islands, you cannot ignore this part of its story. Endless ocean surrounds these islands, along with dark cliffs, towering mountains that rise hundreds of meters into the sky, and winds so powerful that they can make it difficult for people to even stand upright. The weather can change within minutes. One moment the sun is shining, and the next, the entire island disappears into thick fog. But perhaps the greatest mystery of the Faroe Islands is not how people live here. It is why they never want to leave. What is it about these stormy islands, where it rains for most of the year, where winter daylight lasts only a few hours, and where the nearest major city lies hundreds of kilometers away across the open ocean? Today, we are setting out on a journey to the Faroe Islands, a place at the edge of the world that will make you think. The edge of the world. Technically, the Faroe Islands are part of the Kingdom of Denmark. But in practice, they are an autonomous country with their own distinct identity. They have their own parliament, their own flag, their own government, and even their own language. The Faroe Islands are an archipelago of 18 islands, 17 of which are inhabited. Together, they cover a total area of about 1,400 square kilometers. Smaller than the metropolitan area of many of the world's capital cities. But the Faroe Islands are known not for their size, but for their isolation. On the map, Iceland lies about 450 kilometers to the west, Scotland about 320 kilometers to the southeast, and Norway about 650 kilometers to the east. Between these three, in the cold and turbulent waters of the North Atlantic Ocean, the Faroe Islands stand almost alone. For centuries, reaching these islands was considered a journey between life and death. And to be honest, even today, the weather, not people, makes the final decision. The population is only about 55,000 people, roughly the size of a small city. Yet what is truly remarkable is that despite its small population, the literacy rate is nearly 100%. The standard of education is so high that even many developed countries struggle to match it. The official language here is Faroese, which is considered one of the world's best preserved ancient languages. It is believed to be the closest living language to that of the Old Norse Vikings. In other words, if a Viking from 1,000 years ago suddenly arrived here, this would probably be the language that felt most familiar. The currency is the Danish krone, but the Faroe Islands also issue their own banknotes. Interestingly, almost everything here has to be imported from abroad. Cars, electronics, timber, fruits, vegetables, and even many everyday essentials. Because the amount of land suitable for farming on these islands is extremely limited. The land where it never stops raining. To understand life in the Faroe Islands, you first have to understand its weather. There is a famous local saying, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. That's because sunshine, rain, fog, and strong winds can all appear within the same hour. It rains in one form or another on nearly 280 days a year, meaning there are barely 100 days when no rain falls from the sky. But rain is not the only challenge. Winds from the North Atlantic blow almost constantly across the islands. In many areas, the average wind speed exceeds 40 kilometers per hour, and during storms, it can surpass 150 kilometers per hour. And that is probably the reason why you don't see trees in the Faroe Islands. The harsh climate, thin soil, and relentless strong winds prevent most trees from ever fully growing. But where trees cannot grow, grass thrives. And it is this grass that has given rise to the island's unique architecture. When you arrive in the villages of the Faroe Islands, you'll notice many houses with grass growing on their roofs. At first glance, it looks as if someone lifted a piece of a hillside and placed it on top of a house. But this is not just for beauty. In fact, the tradition of covering roofs with grass is nearly 1,000 years old and dates back to the Viking era. At that time, wood was extremely scarce on these islands, so people began building homes using stone, limited wooden frames, and layers of soil and grass on top. Over time, these homes became one of the defining symbols of the Faroe Islands. These grass-covered roofs, known as turf roofs, act as natural insulation. In winter, they keep the heat from escaping, and in summer, they help keep the house cool. Locals say that even when it's raining outside, hail is falling, or an icy Atlantic storm is raging, the inside of these homes remains calm and peaceful. But their benefits don't end there. These living roofs are also incredibly valuable for the environment. The layers of grass and soil absorb carbon dioxide, release oxygen, and retain rainwater. In other words, the people of the Faroe Islands developed a form of sustainable architecture nearly 1,000 years ago, something the modern world is only now trying to embrace. A journey across the Faroe Islands. Now, let's explore the Faroe Islands and take a closer look at the lives of the people who call them home. This is Tórshavn, the capital and largest city of the Faroe Islands, with a population of about 23,000. Tórshavn is the capital of the Faroe Islands, and nearly half of the country's population lives here. But when you see Tórshavn, it hardly feels like you're standing in a capital city. There are no towering skyscrapers or crowded streets. Instead, colorful houses along the waterfront, narrow lanes, and old buildings with grass-covered roofs continue to define the city's character. Tórshavn's most famous district is Tinganes, filled with red wooden buildings and grass-covered roofs. It is considered one of the world's oldest parliamentary meeting sites. It is believed that political assemblies have been held here since the Viking Age. What's even more remarkable is that some government offices of the Faroe Islands are still located inside these historic buildings today. But the true beauty of the Faroe Islands lies in its small villages. If you travel west from Tórshavn Airport, you'll soon arrive at a tiny village called Gásadalur. Today, it is famous around the world for the Múlafossur waterfall, a breathtaking waterfall that plunges directly into the ocean. As you watch the water cascading into the endless sea, with the waves crashing loudly against the cliffs below, you realize just how beautiful nature can be. But the story of this village is even more fascinating than the waterfall itself. Until a few decades ago, the only way to reach Gasadalur was by crossing a steep mountain on foot, through rain, snow and storms. This was the route that connected the village to the rest of the world. Food, medicine and other essential supplies were all carried along this path. But today, engineers have transformed access to the village by carving a tunnel through the rock beneath the mountain. And as you drive through this tunnel, it feels like an experience unlike any other. As we continue our journey, this is Sørvágsvatn, the largest lake in the Faroe Islands. At first glance, it looks as though the entire lake is floating above the ocean. In reality, it's an optical illusion. But when you stand on the edge of the Trellanipa cliff, looking down at the Atlantic Ocean and up toward the lake, even your eyes are fooled for a moment. That's why many people consider it one of the most extraordinary natural sights in the world. Just imagine if you had the chance to travel back in time 100 years. While scientists haven't invented a time machine yet, the moment you step into the village of Saksun in the Faroe Islands, it feels as though time has stood still. Nestled in a peaceful valley surrounded by towering mountains, this village is considered one of the most beautiful places in the Faroe Islands. Only a few dozen people live here. Houses with grass-covered roofs, a quiet lagoon in front, and cloud-covered mountains all around make it feel as though you've stepped out of the 21st century and into the Faroe Islands of several centuries ago. And then comes the most remote village on our journey, Mykinis. Reaching this island can sometimes mean putting your life at risk. Strong winds and towering waves often prevent boats from operating for days. Helicopters are unable to fly, and in the face of nature's fury, people are left powerless. That's why the population of this village is just 16. Yes, you heard that right. Only 16 people live in Mykines, but they share the island with around 60,000 puffins. These small birds with their colorful beaks have become a symbol of the Faroe Islands. The sea cliffs of Mykines are home to countless nesting birds. From a distance, it looks as if the entire mountainside is moving. Now we board a helicopter to return to the previous island, then get back in our car and head toward the Eysturoy Tunnel, one of the greatest engineering achievements in the Faroe Islands. Opened in 2020, the Eysturoy Tunnel is nearly 11 kilometers long and runs beneath the Atlantic Ocean. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build, but it permanently transformed travel between the islands. A journey that once took more than an hour can now be completed in just a few minutes. But what made this tunnel famous around the world isn't its length. It's the world's first underwater roundabout, located right in the middle of the tunnel. Yes, hundreds of feet below the surface of the ocean, engineers carved a circular roundabout into solid rock. As you drive through the tunnel, you enter a massive circular chamber, illuminated with blue light. At its center stands an artwork by renowned Faroe Islands artist Trondur Patterson, creating the illusion of light flowing beneath the sea. For a few seconds, you completely forget that thousands of tons of seawater are directly above you. Like the Eysturoy Tunnel, the Faroe Islands are now home to more than 20 mountain tunnels, along with several tunnels built beneath the sea. These tunnels have certainly reduced the distance between the islands, but they could never solve the Faroe Islands' oldest challenge: food. For centuries, farming on these islands was almost impossible. Strong winds, thin soil, and a harsh climate made large-scale agriculture extremely difficult. Even today, only potatoes and a few limited crops are grown here. Fruits, vegetables, grains, and most everyday necessities have to be imported across the sea, making them quite expensive. But before modern ships and supermarkets existed, the people of the Faroe Islands had only one source of survival: the ocean. And it was this very ocean that gave rise to a tradition that has made the Faroe Islands one of the most controversial places in the world. the pilot whale hunt. The Faroe Islands' most controversial tradition often begins with a phone call, a radio message, or sometimes simply news spreading throughout an entire village. A pod of pilot whales has been spotted at sea. Within minutes, people begin leaving their homes. Fishermen rush toward their boats. Harbors come alive with activity, and soon dozens of boats head out into the ocean. Their goal is not to hunt immediately, but to control the movement of the pod. The boats slowly begin surrounding the pilot whales, guiding them from the open ocean toward shallow coastal waters. This pursuit can continue for several kilometers. Eventually, when the entire pod reaches a bay or a nearby shoreline, the people waiting on the beach enter the water. What happens next is what has placed this tradition at the center of global controversy. Using sharp blades and specialized tools, the whales are killed. Within minutes, the blue water of the sea turns red with blood, and the entire pod of pilot whales is gone. Images and videos of this event go viral around the world every year. Critics describe it as cruel and inhumane. Many environmental organizations have been calling for an end to the tradition for decades, but many people in the Faroe Islands see it very differently. They say this is not a sport or a form of entertainment, but a living tradition that dates back more than 1,000 years. From the Viking Age to the present day, pilot whale meat and blubber have been an important source of food for the people of these islands. According to them, it is a community hunt, not a commercial one. And for food, the sea has always been their primary source of survival. But perhaps this is also the biggest question surrounding the Faroe Islands. Is this a cruel tradition that should be left in the past? Or is it part of the way of life of people who continue to survive while battling the forces of nature at the edge of the world? Let us know your opinion in the comments. The Viking legacy. Like its controversial tradition, the history of the Faroe Islands is just as dark and mysterious. Perhaps that's why many people around the world see the Faroe Islands not just as a group of beautiful islands, but as the last surviving land of the Vikings. Around 1,200 years ago, when most people in Europe were afraid to settle even along the coast, warriors emerged from the cold northern seas, whose very name spread fear across the continent. These were the Vikings. They were not just sailors. They were explorers and traders, but they were also raiders and warriors. Their long wooden ships would suddenly appear off the coast of a village, and within hours, the entire settlement would be plundered. Churches were set on fire, treasures were taken, and many people were captured and carried away as slaves. During that time, a prayer became common in many parts of Europe. God, save us from the fury of the Northmen. It is believed that Viking sailors reached these islands around the 9th century. At that time, the Faroe Islands were among the most remote and isolated places in the world. But for the Vikings, that was their greatest advantage. There was no king, no army, no enemy. Only the sea, the cliffs, and the challenge of survival. Gradually, they established villages here, raised sheep, caught fish, and built a new world in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Today, most people in the Faroe Islands are believed to be descendants of those Vikings. Their language, traditional songs, festivals, and even their cuisine still reflect the legacy of Viking culture. The islands built by fire today. The Faroe Islands look as if they were created by an artist. Lush green mountains, towering cliffs rising straight out of the sea, and islands disappearing into the clouds. But their beginnings were anything but peaceful. In fact, the Faroe Islands were born from fire. Around 50 to 60 million years ago, as the Atlantic Ocean was forming, enormous amounts of lava erupted from beneath the Earth's surface. Over thousands of years, continuous volcanic eruptions laid down thick layers of basalt rock. Later, wind, rain, and the power of the ocean slowly carved these rocks away. This process, which lasted for millions of years, shaped the Faroe Islands into what they are today. That's why the mountains here don't look like ordinary mountains. In many places, it seems as though gigantic cliffs have been lifted straight out of the sea. One of the Faroe Islands' most famous natural landmarks is Drangarnir. Standing in the middle of the ocean, this massive sea stack is known around the world for its natural stone arch. From a distance, it looks as if someone has placed a giant stone gateway in the middle of the sea. Powerful waves continue to crash beneath it, yet for thousands of years, this rock formation has stood firm against the Atlantic Ocean. In the same way, if you continue toward Kalsoy Island, you'll find Kalar Lighthouse, one of the most famous places in the Faroe Islands. Built at the very end of a narrow mountain ridge, this small lighthouse is surrounded by the ocean on all sides. Standing here, it feels as though the world ends at this very point. Hundreds of feet below are sheer cliffs, and ahead lies nothing but the vast Atlantic Ocean. Interestingly, the people of the Faroe Islands see these cliffs as more than just natural formations. Many of them are tied to ancient local legends. One such place is Tröllkonufingr, which means the witch's finger. Rising from the sea, this narrow rock formation really does resemble a giant finger from a distance. According to local folklore, a giant witch once tried to carry these islands to Iceland, but when the sun rose, she was turned to stone. Even today, her finger is said to stand in the middle of the sea. Why nobody wants to leave? The biggest mystery of the Faroe Islands is not how people live here. It's why they don't want to leave. Think about it. It rains for most of the year. In winter, the sun is visible for only a few hours a day. The islands are surrounded by the ocean, and the world's major cities are hundreds of kilometers away. At first glance, it seems like the kind of place where every young person would want to leave as soon as they had the chance. And to be fair, many of them do. After finishing school, many young people move to Copenhagen, London, Oslo, and other major cities. Better universities, more career opportunities, and the attraction of a bigger world draw them away. But what's interesting is that the population of the Faroe Islands has remained relatively stable for decades. That's because many of those who leave eventually return. But why do they come back? The answer may lie in the Faroe Islands' sense of community. Only about 55,000 people live here. So few, in fact, that the entire country often feels like one big family. In the small villages, people are more than just neighbors. They are part of each other's lives. If your family has lived here for 6 generations, chances are that most people in the village know your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and even the generations before them. Living anonymously here is almost impossible. Some people might find that overwhelming, but for the people of the Faroe Islands, it's a sense of belonging. That's why crime is extremely low. Children are given freedom from an early age, and the community continues to be one of the most important parts of daily life. This deep sense of connection is also reflected in their cultural traditions. One of the Faroe Islands' most famous traditions is the chain dance. It is considered one of Europe's oldest continuously practiced traditions. For nearly 800 years, people have stood hand in hand in a circle, singing the stories of their ancestors while dancing. What's most remarkable is that today's younger generation still knows the words to these songs. The same stories, the same melodies, and the same tradition that has continued unbroken for centuries. But the Faroe Islands are not a place that lives only in the past. They are also considered one of the world's most modern and digitally connected societies. Fiber optic internet reaches almost the entire country, even in the most remote villages. People can work online just like someone in New York, London, or Tokyo. Many work for international companies, while sitting inside homes with grass-covered roofs, with sheep grazing just outside their windows. In other words, the Faroe Islands are a fascinating contradiction. On one hand, there are 1,000-year-old Viking traditions. On the other, some of the fastest internet connectivity in the world. On one side, there are small villages surrounded by storms. On the other, there is a seafood export industry worth about $1.2 billion. Yet despite all this, one challenge continues to remain. Many young women leave for larger cities to pursue higher education and better career opportunities, and many of them settle there permanently. Over the past few decades, this has resulted in some islands and villages having more men than women. As a result, many men from the Faroe Islands have married women from other countries, particularly from Thailand and the Philippines. Today, in some villages of the Faroe Islands, you'll find not only Faroe's culture, but also glimpses of Southeast Asian culture. So what about you? Would you ever want to live at the edge of the world like the Faroe Islands? Or would you rather just visit? What are your thoughts on the controversial pilot whale hunt? And which country are you watching this video from? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please support us by liking and sharing it. And for more exciting travel documentaries like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the notification bell. Thank you.